Hi, welcome to the latest episode of Global Go Connect's webinar series. My name is Simone Sandoval, and I'm the Director of Licensing and Compliance for Global Go. We are a best-in-class cannabis consulting firm providing end-to-end solutions for the global cannabis industry with affiliate offices in the US, Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, Cyprus, the UK, Switzerland, and Africa. Today's topic will be on Israel's medical cannabis market, where we will be discussing the current and future opportunities within the region. As the leader in research and development, Israel is a global cannabis hub with room to expand. The market continues to grow as the prospects of adult use loom, with the Ministry of Health reporting over 100,000 active medical patients as of last November. Now, this is a 30% increase from last year, making Israel one of the largest centrally regulated medical markets in the world. With it being predominantly flower market, 82% of its products is smokable dried flower, with the remainder being extracts. Now, aiding in this discussion will be experts from Cannabalog, Cannamerks, InterCure, IMC, Amo Spencer & Co., and the Israel Institute of Technology. And now, before we dive into the panel, I'd first like to thank fellow collaborators and sponsors, Cannabalog, Cannamerks, and Zuberlawler. I'd also like to remind viewers that while this webinar is free, we encourage donations to the Last Prisoner Project, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to cannabis criminal justice reform and working to release and rebuild the lives of those individuals who have suffered from cannabis criminalization. If you would like to make a donation, please visit lastprisonerproject.org, as every bit counts. Now, let's dive into the panel. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Alex Rabinovich, CEO and Director of InterCure and CanDoc. Now, Mr. Rabinovich has served on InterCure's board of directors since October 2018 and serves as the current CEO of InterCure, which is a leading, profitable, and fastest growing cannabis company outside of North America. CanDoc is a wholly owned subsidiary of InterCure and is Israel's largest licensed cannabis producer and one of the first to offer GMP certified and pharmaceutical grade medical cannabis products. He has significant public company experience with both the NASDAQ and Tel Aviv listed companies. And he also serves as the CEO of GFC Greenfields Capital Limited, which is a public company listed on the Tel Aviv, engaged in investments in renewable energies. He also serves as the board of directors of XTL Biopharmaceuticals, which is a public company listed on the NASDAQ, and until 2014 served on the board of directors of Pilat Medical Media Global PLC, which is a public company listed on Tel Aviv and the alternative investment market of the London Stock Exchange. Now, Mr. Rabinovich holds a BA degree in economics and accounting from the University of Haifa. And without further ado, please take it away, Alex.
Thank you, Simone. Actually, I didn't know I had so many titles. So hi, everybody. My name is Alex Rabinovich. I'm the CEO and a major shareholder of InterCure. First of all, I want to thank our partners, Cannabalog and Global Go, for inviting me to speak with you today. For those listening who may not be familiar with us, we are a dominant cannabis company in Israel, also focused on the international cannabis market, trading on TSX, Tel Aviv, and NASDAQ under the symbol INCR. We are also known as the leading profitable and fastest growing company outside North America. And this is especially thanks to our dominant position in the Israeli medical cannabis market, which is well known for its research, but it's also the leading pharmaceutical grade cannabis market in the world. Israeli market finished 2021 with an annually run rate of approximately 40 tons of pharmaceutical grade cannabis dispensed. This is approximately 50% growth from 2020 and about 4 times larger in size than the German market. And the German market also includes dronabinol, which is an isolated THC product, which is not included under the Israeli regulation. Part of the reason—
Can you kindly move the slide?
This?
Go to the second slide, I believe, no?
Yeah, we are in the second slide.
So we see just the first slide.
Okay. One second.
Sorry, everybody. Can you see this slide?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So part of the reason that the Israeli market is few steps ahead and growing faster than the German market is the favorable regulation where physicians prescribe patient categories instead of specific products, and a much efficient market leading to a better offering to patient community at a price per gram, which is about 50% less than the German market with a higher quality, resulting in a solid demand, which is not only totally depending on reimbursement as most of the German market. As the growing demand in Israel, Israel has also become the leading market in the world for importation. It's unbelievable for such a small country, but we are a few steps ahead of all other territories, with about 22 tons imported in 2021. And this is practically only in the last 6 months due to the pause of importation caused by the 109 protocol lifted on around June. In Germany, the situation is a bit foggy. Don't count on those numbers, but we estimate that the imports were about 12 to 14 tons, higher than the amount actually dispensed. Since the end of 2019, the Israeli market is growing sequentially, and patient count has gone from 35,000 to more than 100,010, and we expect that in the future it will go to about 3 to 5% of population. We've ended 2021 with a run rate of about $300 million, representing the biggest RX out-of-pocket product in Israel. This is amazing revolution that actually happened in 2 years. And we expect favorable legislation during 2022, including further reform for medical cannabis by removing barriers for local cultivation, manufacturing, and exportation, in parallel of easing the procedures for new patients and hopefully legalizing CBD products. Israel is also a runway for legalizing adult use cannabis. While the government, the last government stated that 27% of adult Israelis are consuming cannabis, this is probably one of the highest usage of percentage in the world. And this is basically for a decriminalized product. We don't have the time to dive into the political situation in Israel, but I will summarize that for us, it's not a question of if, rather than when. A bit about InterCure. Today, we are Israel's largest licensed cannabis company with approximately 30% reach of Israel GMP medical cannabis market. And since we began cultivating, we've grown from about 10 people to around 330 employees today, with more than 60 specialized medical cannabis pharmacists. We are real pioneers, as other companies in Israel. We are real pioneers of the industry with more than 14 years of organic growth and accumulated know-how. We now operate in 5 territories, in which Israel is, of course, our main home base. And besides serving all the Israeli market, we run and operate the leading medical cannabis dedicated pharmacy chain, consists of 20 pharmacies, in which 14 are dispensing cannabis daily. Our balance sheet is solid with close to $85 million Canadian. And although the Israeli market is growing fast, InterCure is growing much faster than the market. And this is our quarter by quarter annualized revenues and EBITDAs. And we are very proud to be probably one of the first companies in the space reaching a run rate of $100 million Canadian with $23 million in EBITDA. we are not only pioneers and leaders in importation, we also own and operate 2 sites in Israel with 355,000 square feet of operational cultivation facilities, considered one of, if not the largest cultivator in Israel. And we are very proud of reaching the highest quality dry flower cookies genetic cultivated by us, by our team, representing what we believe the future of InterCure and the Israeli cannabis industry, which is exportation in parallel of importation. And for those of you who wants to buy those products, you can reach Yoram and get my mail. And yeah, and with this, I will finish and wish us all an exciting 2022.
Simone, you are on mute. Okay.
Hi, well, thank you, Alex, for that great presentation. Now let's turn to our panel, but first I'd like to introduce our moderator, Mr. Yoram Eshel. Mr. Eshel has an MBA in Economics and Business Administration and has vast experience in global transportation, warehousing and distribution systems and processes, forwarding customs and trade compliance programs, GEP and temperament management, safety, security, and also environmental implications. He has specialized in the pharmaceutical, biological, and API industries, including clinical trials, medical devices, and specialized pharmaceuticals. He also began work with Teva in 2003, and currently he's the founder and CEO of Cannabilog, which is an industry leader in supporting cannabis shipments throughout the world in all terms of logistics aspects, from import, export, to storage, distribution, customs brokerage, international trade, and more. So without further ado, please take it away, Yoram.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody in his own zone. Thank you very much to our friends and partners in Global Go, supporting, working together to put together this very interesting webinar. We will go to the panel. We have 4 panelists. I will present them one by one. We try to build such a program where we will cover 4 areas of the Israeli market. We will start with Oren talking about the Israeli market, the potential in the market. Then we will go to Amos covering the regulations. Then we will go to Professor Dr. Dedi Meiri talking about the science side, the clinical trials, where we can see Israel as leading the scientific and the research of cannabis. Afterwards, we will cover regulations with Amos, new regulations in Israel, what is it all about, the new 109 regulations, and also talking a little bit about the CBD. And last but not least, we will ask Michelle to give us a perspective about the way Israel is perceived in the world, both for import and export. So first of all, I would like to start with Oren. Oren, good evening. First of all, Oren we wish you good health, being a little bit, I think, sick a little bit last week. Oren is one of the Israeli prominent experts in the field of medical cannabis. Oren brings more than 2 decades of proven entrepreneurial experience in founding and growing companies in the med tech and technology software industries. Prior to IMC is one of the leading companies in the world, in Israel. Oren co-founded eWave with the vision of creating an international tech company, providing software solutions, digital IT, HR, and so on. In addition to the tremendously successful enterprise track record, Oren has held executive position at companies within the telecom and the digital media industries. So the first question, Oren, I would like you to relate is talking about the Israeli market, not from high level, but more on the day-to-day level. How do you see what are the trends in the markets, pricing, the import versus the local producers and growers, and what is the export potential in Israel? Please, Owen.
Okay, thank you, Yoram. Hi, everybody. I can speak for hours, you know. I don't know how long do I have.
But you have just 7 minutes, so.
7 minutes, okay, it will be very short. So I do agree with Alex that the Israeli market is very interesting and the potential is very big in the Israeli market. The percentages of usage in the Israeli market are very high relative to the world. And so this is something very unique. I think that we are number one in this area. The other thing that is very unique about the Israeli market is that Israel is isolated. Israel is surrounded by enemies, so because of that we have borders. And what is unique about the Israeli market is that the black market is more expensive than the medical market. It's very different because in other places, usually the black market is the big competition of the medical or the legal market. I think that in Israel, because of that, it's a very unique situation and we don't have a competition on the pricing from the outside. Because of that, if we're speaking about companies and pricing, still there is, I would say, unexploited area. And I think that the prices can change in the Israeli market and go even higher than it is today. And I think that we will start to see the tendency and the difference between ultra premium products and lower products. We haven't seen it yet in the market. I think that we only are starting to see the change in the Israeli market. And the Israeli market is today, everything is done through pharmacies. Everything is highly regulated in the Israeli market. I don't think that we will see a change in that trend. In that aspect, I think that companies that are working in the Israeli market and have experience and know-how have a huge advantage over newcomers to the market. It's highly complicated market. It's much more complicated than it looks from the outside, I would say it like that. So I think that what we will continue and see is that the market will continue and grow, and others will speak about that. We see that the import is growing significantly. Like Alex said, I don't think that we will see any change in this trend in the Israeli market. But the import is starting to change. People are looking more for high quality products. People are willing to pay for high quality products. We're starting to see that the market is becoming more and more selective. If in the past, and when I say the past, it's only 6 months ago, we didn't have enough products in the most wanted categories, which is the top THC. Today we have a huge variety in the pharmacies. The safe in the pharmacy where they store the cannabis is full in all the pharmacies. So the competition is here, it's strong, it will be stronger, and it will be very difficult to be the only one, I would say. So we are not seeing now, only few stars in the market. The variety is so big that everybody has to compete. And I think that companies that have access to the market, like retail, will have a significant advantage in the near future in the market. And we are starting to see the difference. So Israel is super interesting for people that want to sell products, because I think that we are the biggest importer in the world today. I do believe that Israel will start export. Until now, we have seen a very small quantities of product being exported. I think that the huge barrier today is the EU GMP. That has to be, today the regulation is not there. Maybe Amos can elaborate on that, but Israel is working with a different standard than the European standard. It's very similar, but still it's different. So it's more of a decision to do the change than a significant change in the actual way that we are processing and working in Israel.
Oren, I would like to ask you a bit shortly. We lately everybody read the article that Teva decided to enter the market. Teva is the largest generic pharmaceutical company, together with collaboration with the Canbit Tikkun Olam here in Israel. How do you see that? I mean, how do you interpret the pharma companies? We all also read about Pfizer. How do you see that influencing the market?
So I think that it's important message that even the pharma understand that there is a market that they can't ignore. And I think that that's the importance of the decision that Teva have done. It's more declaration, I think, than anything else, because the oil market in Israel is tiny, relatively. It's a small fraction of the market, and yet it's competitive segment. So maybe that they can drive the demand higher, but it's more about the declaration and about the fact that the farmer is going into the industry. I think that this is what is the importance. It's a clear message to investors, I think. And I think that this is the importance. Regarding Pfizer, it's a bit different because it's more R&D. It's less cannabis over there. Maybe Daddy can speak about that. But Teva is more, the fact that Teva is going to something so generic, although it's the biggest generic company, it says something about the market. There is a market, and the pharma understand that it's going to grow and it's going to be significant, and no one can ignore that. That's the message. You're on mute.
Sorry, Oren, thank you very, very much for reviewing the market in such a very nice way. I would like to move to Dr. Dedi Meiri, the head of research in the Technion, the Israeli Institute of Technology. Dedi is very well-known researcher and developer in the area of cannabis for many, many years. Assistant Professor Dedi Meiri heads the Laboratory of Cancer Biology and Cannabinoid Research at the Faculty of Biology in the Technion, the Israeli Institute of Technology, where he is also a member of the Technion Integrated Cancer Center. Dr. Meiri comes from the highly diverse scientific background. He holds an MSc in biochemistry and a PhD in plant biotechnology from Tel Aviv University. He conducted his postdoctoral fellowship at the Ontario Cancer Institute. Dedi, good evening again. Thank you for joining us. I would like to ask you first about, what are the new trends? What are the new, clinical studies? What is new in the scientific area here in Israel, and how it will influence the future of the cannabis industry? I know it's a broad question, but please.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me for this panel. What looks new to the world, to the outside, it's things that been worked on for a few years. But I think what is new that a lot of studies for years that they've been done on a preclinical, on mice model, is really starting to arrive to clinical models in humans, and actually provide the evidence that what we saw from the patient is really happening, and this is signaling to the pharma, as you asked before, to enter. Actually, we have in Israel almost 110,000 patients that getting cannabis under prescription instead of other medicines. So this is a medicine in Israel being given by physician under healthcare. But still there is the big question mark whether this is really working on many indications. We know that it's helpful for sleep or reducing pain and in other indication, but there are a major indication related to big pharma, like affecting cancer, affecting Alzheimer, affecting real disease that we don't have a solution. And there is a huge question mark behind it, whether cannabis can be affecting these diseases. You know, cannabis is affecting our endocannabinoid system that actually controlled almost all our other system. Every cell in our body harboring the endocannabinoid system. And for that reason, cannabis is affecting that. What I see, at least from our work, but for others, that we provide real evidence. I will take cancer as an example. My lab work on leukemia and breast cancer, and we finished actually all the preclinical. We define a specific strain and specific molecules that affecting leukemia and kill leukemia cells. We understand which are the molecules, what they are binding, how they're affecting, why they are killing a mutated cell and not affecting a not mutated cell. And we're starting clinical trial. Actually, Oren Schuster and Alex Rabinovich are partners on this study, both investors and part of these clinical trials. And I think this is what brings the pharma and the physician to really believe. When I'm sitting in front of a physician and showing him the results that we're having, explaining the mechanism of action, why it's working, showing the preclinical, we did 5 different animal models showing that we really can affecting this cancer. This make the pharma and the scientist and the physician believing in this field. And I think this is the big change that's starting to happen. There was just now a big conference, a biotech conference, the JP Morgan, and we spoke there, and the interest of the pharma, the big pharma, in our results and in our company, in our study, is enormous, and it's something that I didn't see 2 or 3 years ago. And I think this is a big change that we are going to see, that the big pharma is starting to enter, and it's because the results from the studies, they take years. You know, science takes years, but we're doing that already 7 years, so the results are coming. You know, if I look on the cannabis fields in 3 to 5 years, I see two products that will be sold to the patient. One product I think will still be the whole plant extract, mainly to improve quality of life. You know, cannabis is affecting sleep, pain, appetite, mood, anxiety, and many of our patients, actually, I think around 80% of the patients using cannabis to improve quality of life, whether these are PTSD patients, a cancer patient that getting chemotherapy and want to reduce pain to sleep better, autistic kids, and I can go on and on. Pain patients, these are patients that taking something very global, like holistic treatment, improving sleep, reducing pain, reducing anxiety, a little bit here, and here, and you get something more global. On the other side, I think we will have products with a specific molecules, whether this is the whole plant, but we know what are the molecules, unique plants that being breed and explore for a specific indication. So insomnia, specific types of cancer, migraine. So very unique strain or very unique product to very specific indication that are starting the clinical trials now. And I think that we will see these products 2 years from now. And I think this will change the field. So if Oren and Alex spoke about export, I think these results from Israel, if we define a specific unique extract or specific unique composition of molecules that are unique, and we will prove that in clinical trial that is now killing specific cancer or affecting migraine, this will be open the world for export from Israel for these strains, these specific products. And I think this is the future and where we are going now.
Thank you, Daddy. Two more questions. One is, can you share with us a little bit, I don't know, roughly, how many clinical trials they are running now in Israel in the cannabis area? Are you getting good cooperation with the Israeli hospitals? And the second question, I think it's a very common question, probably people asking you 10 times every day. Cannabis can help us with the COVID?
So I will start with the first one about the clinical trials. In Israel, we have a huge support by physicians, hospitals, and the healthcare doing clinical trials. You know, Israel is a different, we all been covered by the government and the HMOs, what we call, but the healthcare. And actually, we all have kind of insurance. And when we are getting many medicines under our healthcare government insurance, so the government is actually, or the hospitals and the HMO looking for cheap or cheaper medicines, and cannabis is a cheap medicine, consider other medicines. So there is a big support. It's very easy considering other countries to do clinical trials. And because it's under healthcare already, and we have 110,000 patients, it's easy to start a clinical trials. I don't know how many clinical trials are running, and it depends how you call the clinical trial. So if it's just following up on patient and looking on specific indication, there are many. If we're talking about specific products or specific strains for specific indication, there are, I know it more than 10. I'm participating today around 17 clinical trials altogether in different indication, part of them specific product for specific indication, part of them more wide, but there are many clinical trials that are running, and I think this is the future of being more personalized. This is first question. Second, about the COVID, there was a publication a few days ago that made a lot of waves. This is not new for us. These are, you know, I don't want to pour cold water on that, but this was a very basic study published in not a medical journal, in a herbal, in a holistic journal, not a very good one. Very basic publication showed that the acid form of the cannabis, actually CBDA and CBGA, can bind the spike proteins and block or inhibit the virus to bind the cells. This was cells growing in a plate, a very basic work. First of all, we need to understand that these are the acid forms. So when we are smoking cannabis or buying an extract, it's already been decarboxylated and then these molecules are not there. So we don't have products like that on the shelf. Second, it's, you know, I'm always saying that this is the first month of a master's in my work. Now there is few years to make it real, to do it in more complicated
so we will have to wait.
Areas. We need to wait. It's far from being a real result.
Thank you very much, Daddy. Highly appreciate it. And good luck with your very important job, you know, improving and developing new products for the cannabis industry.
Thank you very much.
We want to go to the regulatory side. I see that a lot of people are asking questions about what are the imports, new regulations. Do we need to have EU GMP or CUMCS or IQC and other questions? I see a lot of questions around that. So we will move to Amos. Amos, you can open your microphone. Amos, the first thing is I would like to ask you specifically if you can go over, you know, the new regulations regarding the imports. Then we can elaborate a little bit about the EU GMP issues. And so can you please share with us your vast experience? Before that, I would like to present you. So 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Thank you. Amos. Amos Bentor is the founder and senior partner at Amos Bentor & Co., which has merged on 1/1/2022, actually a few weeks ago, with Shibolet Law Firm, which is one of the Israeli largest law firm. Amos is leading Amos has lead for years and is going to continue leading at Shibolet, the healthcare practice, advising healthcare systems and industries, public and privately owned, HMOs, pharmaceutical companies, clinical trials, startup manufacturing, importing, release to market, distribution, the inventions, recalls, etc., medical device, digital health companies and service providers, and the biggest logistics centers in the industry in Israel. Supply chains, pharmacy chains, and most of the medical cannabis players. Mr. Benson is well known for his strategic contribution to clients, finding the right ways to open a new market. So Amos, the floor is yours. There are a lot of questions around that, so let's go.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and sharing. We'll try to keep the time, because if we'll start to talk about Israel and regulation, probably it will take us a few years. Just to say that, you know, from what you just said about us and our experience, naturally we came from the healthcare system into the cannabis medical grade industry once it was announced by the government, that actually started off around 2016. Until then, the market was not regulated at all. And since then, since the government has decided to try to compare the standards of the supply chain to pharmaceutical standards, this was, of course, the time for us to come in, since we are well-versed and advising different healthcare players. So what happened in Israel was the following. You know, we started with a roadmap back in 2016 that looked very good. Actually, when I'm saying looked very good, from my standpoint, the government has decided to actually enact and adjust the medical cannabis industry to the pharmaceutical industry in terms of the standards of EU, GMP and GDP, which is, of course, was the time for the healthcare professionals to come in, because without that, you know, for doctors, PhD, for MDs to take actual responsibility to prescribe this product to patients, which is what is allowed right now in Israel, was very difficult, because if they could not make sure that the supply chain is safe with under the standards which is required in Europe and in Israel, it was very difficult for them to take the responsibility. Right now, the MD in Israel is the one who actually is responsible to prescribe, and therefore the standards came in. Just to say a few words about the standards in Israel in the pharmaceutical industry that was actually incorporated into the cannabis industry. Israel has signed a very important agreement, which is called the ACAA with Europe back in 210, and it was ratified, if I remember correctly, around 2012. And then actually the result of that is that the European market what supposedly is actually actually recognizing the Israeli standard in the industry as the European standard, which actually gave a lot of course, advantage to pharmaceutical companies. And then when this was incorporated into the cannabis industry, we thought that, you know, this is a very good and very good step, because all the manufacturers and those who are participating here were expecting their products, once meeting the standard in the European directives, to allow them to export their cannabis to Europe freely, and the other way around, of course, importing into Israel. Now, as you all know, we are a startup nation. And as we are a startup nation, at times also in the regulation, we bring up all kinds of ideas, which I'm not sure that are very helpful when it comes to regulation. In other words, the changes in Israel in the regulatory atmosphere with regards to medical cannabis are quite frequent. And only recently, the agency here in Israel, which is called Yakar, which is actually in charge of the cannabis industry here in Israel and regulation, has changed the rules again. And one of the changes was with regards to importing into Israel. Now, I think that what happened with importation into Israel was that nobody really expected the Israeli market to be so big in terms of what the needs. And also the Israelis are very well known for their, they're using whatever is possible to make sure that they are getting the best product. And therefore, I think that very fast what happened, and if I remember correctly, InterCure was the first one to do it, was that importation started into Israel, and the level of the standard of what was imported was becoming higher in the standard, and therefore the market was really up to buying more from importation.
So
Just recently,
I'm sorry
yeah,
but
sure.
I think that if you want to be a little bit more focused on the current
I'm
Israeli
going into the
regulations,
procedure.
yeah.
So in accordance with the procedure 109, which was changed just recently in November, if one wants to import medical cannabis into Israel, actually you need to make sure that you can verify and certify that your product is actually meeting IMC GMP standard in Israel, which is not identical to EU GMP, but it is, I would say, quite close to it. I would say that for importers, it is easier than exporters in a way. You need to show that you have all the certification for your batch that you are trying to import into Israel with, of course, EU GMP certification. That includes also, of course, the agricultural standards as well. But then, as it happened in Israel so many times, the Israelis are asking for more than what you had to do for getting your GMP certification, including lab tests, which are quite peculiar, but nevertheless, if you want to import into Israel, one of the things you need to make sure is that you are checking what are the recent demands from the agency in Israel, the Yakar, with regards to lab tests. And I think that Yoram, who is well versed into that, can elaborate later and explain to you what is the current situation. Once you have all this in place, you need someone in Israel who actually is the owner of one of the licenses, probably a GDP license, to get the cannabis that you are trying to import into Israel and then distribute it under, I would say, GDP standard to pharmacies in Israel. So this is basically this is basically the standard in Israel with regards to importation. I would say that to export from Israel is much more difficult than to import into Israel, especially for bigger companies.
So since we have 1 minute, Amos, just if you can relate to the CBD, do you believe that it's going to be changed?
Two things that are happening right now which are major to this market. First of all, there's a new law that it is the members of parliament are trying to enact, which is actually to do with distribution internally into Israel. I won't go into it, but it's very important because probably it will change the supply chain if it will actually get the approval. And the CBD is the most important one. As we all know, CBD in Europe and in the States is considered as novel food in some places. Right now, there's a very important committee chaired by one of the ex-Ministry of Health CEOs, a very well-versed MD. And the direction is very clear. Probably they're going to release CBD from the cannabis narcotic law, which means that if this is going to happen and they are going to finish their meetings in the next month, probably within a few months, if it will go well, the CBD will be available for new industries, which is huge here in Israel, especially with the cosmetics industry and the food tech industry. And just to say one sentence, as we know and we deal with it on a daily basis, those industries are waiting with all kinds of innovation delivery systems. And I think that this will be probably very important news for the industries to use CBD.
So the bottom line is that bear with us. We are hoping for a change in a few weeks so we will know what's going on. I will take 1 minute to say that according to the new regulations, and without going into too much details, in order to import to Israel, the supplier has to have either EU GMP or CUMCS or RQC. If you need details, we can go later for the post-harvest section. By that, only that will allow you to bring in product into Israel. GACP is not good enough. Second point, everybody in the world is asking us about the pesticide list. So right now there are 295 pesticides has to be tested. There will be another 16 as starting in May 2022 in 5 months. But there are laboratories which are already approved, authorized to do those tests, both in Canada and in Israel, in other places. So if you need information about that, you can always approach us. We'll be happy to help you with that. So finally, we're going now to Michelle. Michelle Dab, sitting in Canada. Michelle is a business development and partnership professional. Michelle began his career as part of the team that develops a one-of-a-kind legacy electronic medical record system that was in vanguard of the healthcare technology revolution. Michelle spearheaded all manners of initiatives, both in healthcare, IT, and with a number of other companies from whom he has consulted privately, including other healthcare software companies, as well as a non-profit sector. Canamerics is the only fully automated B2B auction platform for the legal cannabis industry, enabling licensed cannabis companies to trade bulk cannabis product, and cannabis genetics with each other in an easy, low-cost manner, fully compliant with Canadian and international regulations. Since its launch in November 2017, more than 50 Canadian licensed cannabis companies have joined Canamerics. So good evening, good morning to you, Michelle. Thank you for joining. So the question for you, short time, Michelle, is actually how the world is looking at Israel. What is the potential over there? How do you, with your vast experience, looking at the Israeli market in terms of potential, how hard it is to trade with Israel, licenses and so on? And the last question will be how Israel looks like when you compare it to other markets. So the floor is yours, Michelle. Thank you.
It's a big question. How do we compare with other markets, the Israeli markets? It's both easier and more difficult in interesting ways. You know, at the beginning, nobody understood the Israeli market. I think the Israeli market grew much faster than people expected, but the country of Israel itself and its regulatory environment was a bit of a mystery, a wall, and it took a subset of people with the right temperament and the right attitude to be able to do the first shipments. Because after all, at the very beginning, you know, the very first export of product out of Israel was actually a deal that Canamerics was involved in. Up until that time, and that was very recently, there was no way to get product out of Israel once it was in. So if a transaction happened and the product was bad or there was a failure of some kind, that product had to be destroyed. And when you're talking about tons, this is a huge business problem for people. So it took an enormous amount of trust to be able to negotiate those first deals. As we've moved along, you know, 2 Novembers ago, the MOH kind of dropped the hammer on everybody and changed the rules almost overnight with very little warning, although there had been rumblings. And this is when we came up with the new CUMCS regulations, the IQC, the new and, you know, very difficult pesticide testing. And, you know, from a Canadian perspective, this was extremely problematic because there were no labs in Canada that had validated tests for these pesticides. So almost overnight, a country that had been supplying huge amounts of product to Israel had to stop, and everybody had to reacquaint themselves with the new regulations.
For like 6 months, yeah.
it was basically 6 months. And there were a few companies in Israel that were able to negotiate it, but they had to take huge risks at the start to do it. They had to take in a lot more product before the regulations changed without knowing if they could possibly sell it. So these were critical issues. I think as things have fleshed out, it's become much more routine to do business with Israel. You have to understand a very delicate and sequenced timeline. You know, when to apply for the import permit, when to apply for the export permit, how much time each of these steps take, when does the lab test happen, how do you arrange your time and sequence the actual deals, when do you bring in the logistics people, how do you get the phytosanitary certificate, how do you make sure that every line in the barcode is exactly right, so that when those boxes are sitting in customs at Ben Gurion Airport, the customs agents don't have a single problem with it. Because if there's a single problem with it, who knows what could happen.
That takes a lot of knowledge and experience in order to do it. And as you know, it has to be on certain days. And it has to be very, very accurate, all the documents and all the labeling and the packaging. Yeah, please.
And then you're always negotiating with Shabbat, and you're negotiating with Israeli holidays to match other people's holidays. But we've all gotten very good at it. Certainly the licensed Israeli importers have very, very sophisticated QA teams that know what they're doing. And even before CUMCS and IQC, when EU GMP was still the standard, or IMC GMP, and a country like Canada was not necessarily regulatorily aligned with a country like Israel, still it was possible for the QAs to accept that the product and the SOPs of the supplier were appropriate, and they would sign off on it. But this product still needs to be brought into Israel and packaged according to EU GMP standards. So this is something that the rest of the world is working on, trying to find companies that can get this done as a sort of one-stop shop and service the Israeli industry with an easier turnkey solution to bringing product in. And frankly, I don't see that situation changing, the import situation. I know that the Israelis grow a lot of cannabis and that they're starting to be able to export it. Certainly, as Dedi mentioned, I mean, Israel is at the very forefront of identifying very specific pathologies that this medicine can treat. And so I think there's no doubt that the Israelis will lead the way globally in terms of medicinal cannabis. But there's also no way right now that the Israelis can grow enough product to service their domestic medical market. And now with recreational, and now with CBD about to come, you know, Canada is, you know, and Australia to a lesser extent are very good, almost necessary sources of affordable bulk product that can fit into the Israeli market. And a lot of things that people don't understand is just how difficult it is once the product is actually received in Israel. So much money has been spent in marketing and testing, packaging, distribution, the taxes, the pharmacy relationships. You know, there's a whole network of fingers in the pot, you know, and it's often hard to negotiate for the Israelis on the other side. So it's not obvious, you know, but as we've seen, as Cannamerch has seen, I mean, we have, you know, 400 clients internationally. We move product to Australia, to the UK, to Israel, obviously, within Canada, from the States, from Canada. So we've seen what the regulatory barriers are. I think Australia is by far the easiest, because in Australia, for now, the quality of the product alone speaks for itself. If the product passes the pesticide test, has no heavy metals, has the right levels, you're good. You know, in Israel, in Germany, in the UK, we have very, very difficult regulatory environments. And I think all of us know, because we have long histories in business, that the more money has to go into satisfying regulatory requirements, the less money is going into the quality of the product.
Thank you. Sorry, Michelle, thank you so much. We need to still leave a few minutes for questions from the audience. I just want to say that here in Israel in the last 2 years, Cannabilog, we managed shipments from many, many countries. And it's also an issue of how to know how to deal with the regulatory agencies, right? With the PFARM, with, you know, in Uruguay, in Colombia, in Uganda, in South Africa. There's a lot of issues coming from the agencies themselves and from the regulations, because we know that when you deal with import and export, the importation country and the exploitation country is two different set of rules and set of regulations. And that's a challenge. That's the challenge of the logistic people coming into the picture and have to make it happen. So thank you again, Michelle. I want to go back for 1/2 minute to my friends in the panel, asking if anyone else want to mention something, if you forgot to say something, so you have between 20 to 30 seconds to say. Okay. Thank you very much again for all the panelists. Thank you very much for sharing us the knowledge. I'm going back now to Simon, if there are questions from the audience. So thank you very much, guys, for taking the time and the efforts to be with us. Please, Simon.
Great. Well, thank you guys. Thank you for that really engaging and informative discussion. And, you know, I know it was impossible to fit everything in the hour we allotted for this session. So please, if you're interested in knowing more about the Israeli market or about the global cannabis markets in general, please visit globalgo.consulting. Reach out to me. I can put you in contact with the right people, with our panelists. And thank you again to our keynote, our moderator, our panelists, our collaborators and sponsors. Special thanks to you guys, the attendees, for your interest in the series. And we hope to see you again at our next webinar on clean tech and cannabis next Friday, January 28th. So thank you and stay safe out there.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you for sharing the time with us and sharing the knowledge and the experience.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.